Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for choosing our session. This particular session will be organized in the following way. I will start out as the person who had the longest experience with working with remixing synthetic text and tell how we got to the point where we are at today, which is where Nancy actually has some students who are going to tell us a little bit about what it feels like as a student to be using remixed synthetic text. So I'll start out, my part is only 8 minutes, maybe not even quite that. And here's the background on how I was involved. I am right now emeritus professor at the University of Georgia, still have a research position because I'm finishing up doctoral students who hadn't finished when I retired. So what I'm referring to when I say my classes would be classes I had up until December 2021. And I'm still teaching, but not in an official way. So with that background, let me just say that the impetus for today's session really grew out of my interest as a literacy teacher educator in my belief or feelings or hunch or hypothesis that the feelings of pre-service teachers and also people involved in graduate school as in-service teachers, that the feelings they had developed as they engaged in some of my coursework with mixing synthetic text, that those feelings were beyond what we were capable of really saying much about, because in the field at that time, October 2023, ChatGPT had come out and with some other GAI tools, generative artificial intelligence tools. The field was buzzing. The literacy teacher education field was buzzing with, oh, what's going to happen now? The students are all going to be cheating. They're going to have a GAI helper do the work for them. And there was so much of that panic that I rewrote my actual talk that I was giving at the Literacy Research Association meeting in December of 2023. And I rewrote it to say, I'm interested in the fact that there might be some plagiarism, cheating, et cetera, going on. But as a literacy teacher educator interested on the receptive end, okay, reading, not on the expressive end, which is the writing. But as a reading person, I wanted to know what feelings people had when they actually interacted with remixing of synthetic text. Synthetic text is another name for artificially produced by a GAI tool, such as ChatGPT, but many others as well. So I explored that hunch through asking students in my research team at the time, back when I was teaching, to write up an article of what we had found out so far on this hunch I had. And that article is published now on a Creative Commons site rather. And so it's available to anybody listening to this session today. And Nancy's going to insert it in the chat in case you can see that. If not, let us know and we will try to get the information to you some other way. I also wanted to ask, particularly in this study that has now been published, I wanted to ask particularly, what is it that makes a difference, at least we think to some degree, in how people connect with inanimate objects? People meaning humans, of course, and inanimate objects meaning those remixes that were coming out fast, okay? So my sense was, and we got rejected at a couple of other journals in the meantime because they said, oh, we're not dealing with humans and non-humans right now. That was not a possibility. Well, that was before November 2023 when it became a possibility. All of a sudden, a good publisher in the United Kingdom picked it up, Digital Culture and Education, and published it right away because it was asking some questions that are very relevant today. So that's the background for why we started doing something with real students. In other words, with people, not just in my classes, because remember, I had retired as of December 2021. And so I was looking at the possibility of working with Nancy Heiss, who I know to be a wonderful teacher and to also be able to understand the feelings that I was making a hunch about. And so that's how we got to the point that we're at today. And if you'd like to know about some of those artificial tools that are available, there's a link in the chat from Elverman and Haygood. And sorry, not that one. There's a link from Share in Gambino. I had two references, but the one is Share in Gambino. And that one you should be able to see. And if not, let Nancy or me know, and we will be sure to get something to you so you can find those links. The whole point is there is research behind this. However, and this is the interesting part, I think, of this session, we are doing a session that is more experimental, not in the sense of traditional experiments where you have people who are subjects and then people who are in the control group. No, we're doing something that's more language-wise is more relevant today. And that is that we are actually looking at emergent theorizing through speculative realms. Speculation, and I know this now to be a fact, people are interested in speculative research, especially since the COVID put a lot of people online, and et cetera. And they're really into looking at speculative research. And some methodologists have actually taken that up. If a link will show up, you should see something from Phil Nichols and et al. He's in Texas, and his group has published a paper on what it means to be theorizing in a speculative age. And then, because Nancy and I needed something that was actually we could analyze the data that she collected with her students, we needed something as a method that we could use. And that's the next link, if it's possible to insert that in the chat. And that's a piece that is by a person named Ross. And Ross actually had a way of showing people and has been doing it for about 10 years now. So the speculative stuff we're hearing about in research is new in the literacy field, but it's not new in other fields where people have been engaging in it for a while. So as you listen to Nancy give her report on this research that we did, remember it's a conceptual piece. It's not the traditional way of showing how you have a research question that is followed up by a literature review, that is followed up by a methodology section, that is followed up by an analysis, that is followed up, etc., by an implication section. Speculative research allows us a lot of freedom, and it's great because we are in a realm and an age right now of AI when, quite frankly, a lot of people are speculating about a lot of things. So Nancy, take it away with your slides and make it real. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Donna, for that introduction. So our purpose, as Donna mentioned, was to gather data on middle school and high school readers and writers of academic content as they attempted to comprehend synthetic text, defined here as multimodal information, which can be textual, visual, oral, or performative, which is authored by a generative artificial intelligence or GAI tool, specifically in our study with our research with the ChatGPT platform. So before I get too far into our presentation, I'd like to begin by addressing the elephant in the room, our subjectivity statements. So I had the privilege of studying with Donna at the University of Georgia while working on my master's degree. And I've continued to work with her post-graduation for me and post-retirement for her. And I so appreciate the ways that she challenges me to stretch my thinking and better my teaching. and I'm lucky to consider her both a friend and a mentor. When Donna approached me with this project, she asked that I find ways to incorporate AI-generated content into lessons I already had in the works, which was an interesting challenge for me. Fortunately, as a homeschool educator, I had freedom to adjust my lesson plans accordingly, and this conceptual project began. So my children are the participants we observed during our project, and I was their instructor. So in this project, we're focusing on the feelings, kind of an emotional response that consumers of AI generated content have. So feelings and emotional responses are related but separate functions. According to Damasio, emotions are the physical responses your body goes through when you experience something, or even when you think about experiencing something. And feelings are what result as the brain interprets the external stimuli and biological reaction. Thus, we consider feelings to be neurobiological responses. So my first part of this focused on my middle school kids, or my middle school child. I only have one in middle school right now. So for my elementary school students, we use a math curriculum that's very splashy and colorful. It's rigorous, but it's splashy and colorful. The textbooks are done in a comic book style, and they also have a computer platform where they can log on and go through lessons that are kind of gamified. And it seems effective at helping my younger students remain excited about math. My kids will pull out their math curriculums and just read them for fun because they're comic books and there's jokes in there, along with what they're supposed to be learning about. And these books end at the end of 5th grade, and they move on to the middle school curriculum, which is made by the same company, and it's also very rigorous, but it's very dry. There's no pictures, there's no jokes, there's just page after page of wordy explanation and challenging problems. And the switch did not go over well for my middle grade son. And although he seems to enjoy reading very generally, getting him to read his math textbook has been a real struggle for me. So we've talked about various note-taking strategies and the importance of, text boxes labeled important, but nothing has helped him really engage with his curriculum. And it remained a point of frustration for the entire school year. I wanted him to really take the reins, so to speak, instead of having to cajole him into spending time with his math. So one day when it was clear that my son was supposed to have read about the Pythagorean theorem, but had not done his reading, I sat down with him and we read his textbook together, and he complained the whole time that it was boring. And it kind of was. At the time, I was reading You Look Like a Thing and I Love You, How AI Works and Why It's Making the World a Weirder Place. That's by Janelle Shane in 2019. And all of these things that I'm referencing will be in a reference sheet that's in the description of our session. So in this book, Shane emphasized the indefatigable efforts of AI to satisfy the constraints that it's been given. So when I grew tired of trying to explain this mathematical concept to my child, we headed to the computer to, as Ross stated, craft a future or condition to provoke new ways of thinking and to bring particular ideas into focus. I thought that perhaps AI could help explain things in a new way to my son. So I logged into ChatGPT and we asked it to explain the Pythagorean theorem. And in response, we got a pretty dry encyclopedic answer. And my son didn't seem to connect with it very much at all. So we asked ChatGPT to explain the Pythagorean theorem to us like we were 5. And that's a reference to the TV show The Office that my children still think is funny. I think other groups of young people still do. So according to Shane in You Look Like a Thing and I Love You, food seems to be something that computers have a hard time comprehending, at least in the models discussed in her book. So I was surprised when ChatGPT chose to somewhat poorly explain the Pythagorean theorem with a food analogy. It gave us pizza, it gave us chocolate, and later when my teenagers were playing around, still asking for explanations as if they were 5, it kept trying to talk about spaghetti and things. And it was as if ChatGPT knew one thing about 5-year-olds, and that was that they liked food, which I'm not even sure is accurate if anyone's ever tried to raise a picky eater. So here's what ChatGPT had to say about how to think about the Pythagorean theorem in terms of pizza. So imagine you have a slice of pizza with one corner being a perfect corner with two shorter sides that are like the crust and the sauce of your pizza. And now imagine there's a super duper long straw running through and cutting through the cheese. And it's, um, I, my son and I chatted about whether or not that was a good answer and if it sounded true or if it was confusing. And he said that he appreciated how ChatGPT attempted to explain things in simpler terms, but that it seems like ChatGPT is sometimes dumb, and maybe we need to ask it how it makes pizza. ChatGPT doesn't understand pizza. And their explanation of pizza didn't sound like pizza very much at all. So we asked it to try again to explain to us like we were 5, and this time it chose chocolate. And it did not do much better with chocolate than with pizza. So the first thing my son noticed was that the explanation it gave was not a square. They explained a rectangle. We have a 3x4 square of chocolate, and you can't have a 3x4 square. And he also pointed out that the mouse should be cutting across diagonally rather than keeping to the edges of the chocolate. So already he was noticing inaccuracies in the content I was providing. Namely emphasizes that all media experiences are constructed and encourages students to analyze those constructions. And this sort of critical analysis is not unusual for my children. For example, we recently found a discrepancy in a DK timeline book, which reminded us to remain vigilant about verifying the information we're finding and questioning, that's not a word, and questioning the motive for a text creation, whether it's written by a person or whether it's written by AI. Um, so there was a Friday afternoon session by Melda and Yildiz about myths being presented as facts and what should be credible sources. If you're interested in more examples of this, it's called Leveraging Artificial Intelligence in Teacher Education, and it was fabulous. But finding these inaccuracies, even when presented to him through the screen, through a computer, made him feel smarter than a machine. He liked feeling that the knowledge that he already had in his head was important, but he also recognized that these were mistakes that he himself was making on his lessons as well at the beginning. So human error is common as well. So we determined or observed that finding inaccuracies and mistakes can make children feel confident in their own skills. But it also raises questions about the reliability of the information presented. Seeing ChatGPT get something as simple as the dimensions of a square wrong led my student to be wary of other information AI presented to him. So yes, so he felt smarter than a machine, so it raised his confidence in himself, but led him to be confused about whether he should trust the computer. So it was interesting that Benjamin, my son, recognized that AI is ultimately an extension of human thinking. He pointed out that AI only works with information it's being given and it cannot create new things. So in that sense, AI is constantly remixing information it's already being fed. It doesn't create new answers. So he said that we have to grow the mind for it. So after this trial, we gave up on food analogies and we asked GPT to run some calculations. And my son was impressed by the speed at which the answers were coming. And he was so impressed that he forgot or neglected to think about whether the answers ChatGPT was giving us were correct. So I had to prompt him to stop, and we worked through some of the problems by hand ourselves. And we found that the answers, oh, sorry about that. The answers that he was getting were accurate, even though it was really fast. And that's to be expected because that's how computers were designed to compute. They were designed initially to compute information. And so the computer's doing that quickly and accurately. But he still wasn't emotionally engaged in what he was seeing. So we tried one more thing, and we asked ChatGPT to explain the Pythagorean theorem in various voices. Sorry. Oh, I think I'm out of order. But so yeah, so he was impressed that the machine could be smarter than him, which I just talked about. Okay, so various voices. So first we asked ChatGPT to explain the Pythagorean theorem like he was a cowboy. And this short explanation, this is where he started to really feel like it was interacting with him. So he said to me, wait, did he just call you partner? That's funny. I never thought a computer would call you partner or something. Then he says, not that they're inferior to us, but it's just funny when they call you something that makes it seem like they're humans, he said. So he's beginning to kind of personify ChatGPT, whereas before he was thinking of it solely as a computer. Um, so he was feeling amused, and definitely starting to feel more engaged. So yes, so he said, did he just call you partner? And that is interesting because he is moving from an it to a he. He's giving it a gender, a more person-oriented pronoun rather than a thing-oriented pronoun. And later he slips from he to they, but still person-centered. Um, and the interactive nature of this generative text was able to hold his attention much longer than his regular textbook. So he wanted to know, what else can it do? Could it possibly explain the Pythagorean theorem to him like J.R.R. Tolkien might? And it could. So he particularly enjoyed how it actually used real Middle Earth places like Rivendell and the Mines of Moria, while also seeming to explain the Pythagorean theorem quite accurately. This answer was once again amusing. So yesterday, not yesterday, this would have been on Friday session still, Ariana Garcia led a wonderful session about memes titled Propaganda of Our Time. And she mentioned that memes were more likely to be shared, likely because of evidence of human feelings connected to what they were reading. When those memes were humorous rather than when they were angry or sad, people want to share what they find humorous. So in that sense, I feel like this kind of activity that kind of memeified the topic for my son, it kept him entertained and engaged. And then he wanted to share what he was reading with his friends and his siblings, which was rather unusual for him. He had gotten out of the habit of calling people over to read what was in his math textbook, since he had given up his comic book textbooks, but he did want to share what ChatGPT was saying about math. He also, he wanted me to go through so many renditions. He wanted to know if it could do Star Wars for him, and it could. He was especially appreciative of the tagline at the end. He said, "May the math be with you" is amazing. So ChatGPT was able to almost effortlessly, or at least instantly, remix popular culture with mathematics, mimicking essential sentence patterns and referencing important people and places while still addressing the topic. So in this way, I felt that AI outpaces human creativity, or at least my creativity. I lack the ability to churn out creative remixes without laboring over things a little bit. I have to stop and think and research and make sure I'm getting everything accurate. It takes way more thought and effort for me. The product may perhaps be more genuine coming from a human than from a machine. As you've perhaps noticed in the images accompanying these slides, they're all very polished, and yet are often containing functional or anatomical implausibilities or other artifacts that make them seem just not quite right. Missing limbs, or I mean, the lightsaber is just cutting right through Luke Skywalker and he's fine. So things are just a little bit off. And even the text itself, although imbued with details from the chosen theme, it's rather formulaic, and it follows rules that it learned through reading the text that it's remixing, but it involves very little originality. So at the end of our session, I asked Benjamin which explanation was best. Of everything that we had done for his math lesson that day. And he surprised me by saying that the videos that accompany his textbook were the best. And to be fair, the videos that the textbook creators make are highly engaging. They're very passionate about mathematics, and it shows in the videos, even if it doesn't come through well in their text.
Mhm.
And when I asked him what was second best, I was surprised when he ranked his textbook. And this was because he felt like he could really trust them. He had worked with these same creators for several years now, and he trusted the explanations and thought the textbook explained things better, meaning more accurately than ChatGPT did. However, he said that ChatGPT would be more memorable for him. He said, I liked mixing math with other parts of my world that aren't school. So, um, interestingly, my son doesn't often take the initiative to mix math with other parts of his world on his own. And I had never thought before about having him do anything like that. So ChatGPT has inspired us to approach math differently. And I hope that we can create some of our own mathematical remixes in this coming school year. So ChatGPT may be a tool that can help individualize concepts for students and engage them in thinking about concepts in a new way. Um, so with that aside, I'm now going to turn to my high school English class where my daughters completed an AI identification activity. So whereas my son knew he was interacting with AI, my daughters only knew there was a chance that they would be interacting with AI. Their activity was also much more subjective. So rather than using AI to explain something factual, I had ChatGPT write Shakespearean sonnets about subjects that my daughters had previously chosen to write sonnets on. And I then compiled my daughter's original poetry and ChatGPT's poetry into a worksheet and had my daughters identify whether they thought each poem was written by a person, by their sister, or by AI. So they weren't looking to verify the authority or the accuracy of ChatGPT as perhaps Benjamin had been, but they were instead looking for elements of human authenticity and moments of feeling and connection in each sonnet that they read. So only one of my daughters correctly identified the human written sonnet in her worksheet, and the other identified an AI written piece as human written. Before I revealed to them whether or not they answered correctly, we discussed the reasons they made their selections. So interestingly, they were both fairly confident about their reasoning and the evidence they presented, even though only one of them had correctly identified the human written material. One of my daughters was at the time taking a college writing course where they had practiced identifying AI. So she felt particularly confident, but she's the one who misidentified AI as human. Since my daughters were unconcerned about the accuracy of the material before them, since it was poetry and not informational reading, they looked for attributes that felt human. They expected humans to make errors or to take liberty in purposefully breaking rules and poetic constraints in favor of communicating an idea, whereas they expected AI to follow the rules very closely. And they tried looking for the reason the poem was written, so some sort of an opinion or some sort of connection to the subject. One of my daughters said that AI-generated content often feels too perfect, and even AI-generated images exhibit anatomical implausibilities, or they can give terrible advice when you're asking them through chat. So it feels at once too perfect, but also has these very identifiable issues to them. So this perfection leads to a disconnect often between the viewer and the piece of artwork. And my daughter said that these poems, if they're written by ChatGPT, would feel impersonal. Um, and they brought up images such as the ones that we saw that just had, extra fingers or a torso coming out of a table. And so it was interesting. I had them then look at some pieces of artwork to see whether they could determine whether these artwork were by a human creator or a computer generator. And in our initial session, I think I used the word real, and that brought up some conversation between what is real and what is not real. And so if I say real, what I mean is human generated content, and otherwise it's artificial, right? Artificial intelligence. So this next slide will be pictures that are generated by AI and some still life pieces by the artist Robert Douglas Hunter. And we'll see, we'll take a look. I'll discuss it for a minute and then reveal what the answers are. So I feel like a lot of the research that I've come across has discussed how to identify AI pieces that have a human in them. ChatGPT is not very good at fingers and things like that. And there is in my references kind of a primer on how to identify artificial artwork. Um, and these pieces are actually very tricky. And my girls were not able to tell which ones were AI and which ones were by a painter. And I can see in the chat that our participants during our session were also unable to with confidence say which ones were. So the AI images are images A and images B, and B and C are real artwork done with a paintbrush. So it's very difficult to spot AI, as we learned. So our implications are focusing on the question, to what degree, if any, might digital remixing evoke feelings of connection with and through the creator or the human and the created non-human remix? So not a lot of research has yet been done on a reader's response to AI-generated text. There, Beach and Alberman have done some work, and there's Zhang, which is listed in our resources as well. But much less research has been done on student response to AI. So my daughters raised the issue of transparency when they realized how difficult it could be to discern between AI and human-generated content. They wanted to know, they would like to know whether they are looking at things that are AI or human generated. They want to know the difference and be told. So my son knew that he was interacting with AI, and my daughters only knew that they might be interacting with AI. And because it can be so difficult to tell, even when we feel like we're knowledgeable in detecting human generated content, it can be important to know that origin. So many AI text does alert readers of their origin. For example, Google's AI Overview, which synthesizes a number of sources for internet researchers. And Amazon also now offers a similar sort of summary in many review sections for products offered in their websites, including a disclosure that shoppers are viewing AI generated from the text of customer reviews. So it summarizes what it's seeing in the reviews. But not all content that is sometimes obviously AI and sometimes more discreetly AI generated is open about that authorship. So in our discussion, one of my daughters pointed out that it's important to think about where the information is coming from. And my other daughter says that she wants to know who wrote what she's reading and who published it and what their qualifications are, so she can decide whether the information is good or not. ChatGPT may create content that rivals or is even superior to human-generated content, at least within a narrow time frame. But it doesn't typically reveal the sources it combed through to generate its content. So there is a question about whether human readers have a right to know what sort of entity they're interacting with. And I believe that they do. But Zhang and Gosling conducted a study on human response to marketing content generated by AI and humans. And the study showed that the level of satisfaction people felt regarding a well-written text stayed the same when they found out it was written by AI. However, when people found out a text was written by a human, people tended to show an increase in satisfaction with the text, revealing a bias in favor of human-generated content, but not a bias against AI-generated content. So good writing is good writing, and good content is good content. However, because it's possible for AI-generated text to influence human thinking, for example, there's a study by Bay and all regarding opinions on political issues. And they found that human oversight is still needed to ensure the content produced by GAI is appropriate and that inappropriate content is never distributed, because it does influence the way that humans think. And we saw evidence of these kind of guardrails available in a session called Breaking Bias, Media Literacy in the Generative Age with Marina Lombardo and Elena Winnick, which was interesting. So I think then the most ethical thing to do would be to reveal the involvement of AI in a project. Shane, who wrote "You Look Like a Thing and I Love You," suggests AI-generated content be marked somehow, perhaps in a way that computers can understand, with one pixel being a marker, so that there can be an automatic disclaimer added to the content to alert human readers that they are engaging with um, a remix from other sources. Um, so Unfortunately, right now, like social media, for example, is being flooded with AI generated content. And I've seen multiple scholarly publications that included AI generated images without disclosing them as such. A couple of these studies have now been redacted, and it's very interesting to see them and to think what were the motivations of including these things, these well, I read one paper that calls them like a bogus representation of human ideas. Um, so another implication is critical thinking. So even when students feel confident in their ability to discern between AI generated and human generated content, students may still struggle to accurately identify content as such. Honestly, I also feel fairly confident in my skills, and yet I'm also often wrong. So it's important that human users are able to identify content. Sorry, that's a question. Is it important for human users to be able to identify content as AI? And what does this mean for media literacy and our role as instructors? And what does this mean regarding critical thinking and issues of trust and authority in the content we consume? My son felt it was important that ChatGPT give him accurate content, which is fair because he was looking for specific information. And my girls were unable to identify with 100% accuracy which poems were written by AI. And although they were less worried about the authenticity of the content because poetry is itself subjective, um, they weren't so worried about being correct. Um, but I think still as educators, it's important to continue to encourage our students to approach media with a critical eye. So those implications are rather general and huge overarching issues that might take years to sort out, but immediately there are a few implications for teachers that we decided on through this project. And that's that GAI can be used as a tool to stimulate creativity. While the ability of AI to generate remixes outpaces human ability to do the same, the product often lacks in authenticity. Giving people permission to use AI-generated text as inspiration, for example, can allow them to find an idea and rework it. Or students may feel challenged to compete with AI, as if they could write something better, especially with emotionally invested projects such as poetry. So my daughters experienced that, they wanted to make a poem that really pulled on their emotions and their connection with the project so that it wouldn't be um, as bland as they thought a GAI creation might be. Um, and we also found that interacting with generative AI was captivating and exciting. And whereas my son saw textbook reading as drudgery, he was enthralled by what ChatGPT had to say. And the fact that ChatGPT can customize explanations, remixing them with popular culture, means that a text can be rewritten or remixed to capture the interest of many individuals, an infinite number of individuals. So within the classroom, synthetic texts were welcomed, although cautiously, by my students at least. But I've seen other places where students use AI like a search engine, which can be risky because ChatGPT doesn't reveal its sources. So there's that issue of transparency again. And the assumption of ChatGPT as an authoritative source may decrease students' willingness to approach the generated text critically. So let's see. Donna, do you have anything to add here? I think this is about where we left off. I know there was a question about, we did not look at elementary students. And I have elementary students, but I didn't do any activities with them. And I think for that, any readers interested in how to use AI with younger learners, I would point you to the session called AI AIO, which was very engaging for very younger learners, and there were many other wonderful sessions. So thank you so much for your time and for watching our session.